listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix, or lately way outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory. And the whole crew is here. Our intrepid producer, Rod. How you doing today, Rod?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Lee?
Doing great. Great show you put together today. And timely, as usual. And, of course, our multifaceted engineer, Saul, is in the house and audible. Hey, Saul, how you doing?
I'm audible.
There we go. And let's talk about the show today. First off, it is Tuesday, so our guest host for the second hour is Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth. Because apparently we can only get 1 hour of Jason's time. He's that busy. Is that the idea, Rod?
I believe so, yeah.
Yes. I'm just saying, and thanks again to Carmine Sabia for Carmine Mondays yesterday. Fun show. And very good feedback lately. Let me just talk about that. I've seen people on Twitter. I'm feeling better about humanity today. I don't know why. But I'll explain some of it. But some very good feedback on the show lately. And, of course, you should tell your friends, tell your neighbors, because this is a show with the host, that would be me, who's been telling you the truth about Ukraine for years now. Ukraine and NATO. Because, you know, one of the things I was thinking, well, let me introduce the show, then I'll talk about this, Rod. I was thinking about the Atlantic Council, and I'll talk about them in a second. But our show today, from the UK, the great Ian Schilling. And Ian's at the bottom of the hour, am I correct, or is he 15 minutes in?
At the bottom of the hour.
Okay, so at 1/2 hour, that would be the bottom. Ian Schilling will be joining us. Ian Schilling always has a lot of energy. And there's been a lot of COVID-19 news in the UK. So once again, great job by Rod getting someone like Ian Schilling, who's been talking about. Ian's never bought into the COVID-19 thing, ever, right? He's not new to it. He's never bought into it. And meanwhile, lots of, I would say, Ian, I think he'll agree, it's progress if you've been a COVID-19 response skeptic of what's going on over in England. Then, in the second hour, we're going to have Todd from the Center for Immigration Studies joining us. He's a great writer over there. And we've had Todd on the show one time before. Is that correct, Rod?
Yeah, we had Todd Bensman on one time. You weren't feeling well that day.
That explains. So that'll happen sometimes. But great guest. And we've got a great clip related to this. And this is material that YouTube does not want anyone to see. Right, Rod? That's part of what's going on. This video, they don't want people to see it.
Yeah, the video, obviously we can't play the visual of it, but it's the video of Todd down at the border and the illegal migrants coming through and showing how easy it is to get into America.
Well, I'm going to ask Todd, because I got my 24/7 Populist TV channel going. If you go to my Twitter profile, there's a link in my profile. Just click on that. I'm going to see if he'll give me, I don't know if Center for Immigration Studies, if they're real copyright fiends, but if they'll give me permission, I can throw it up on my channel and put it in rotation there. And we'll see. I'll ask Todd about that. I don't know if he knows about that. But because I did get in, they did shut down some stuff on the channel pretty quick. But, you know, it's all an experiment, no problem. And now I've got stuff up there like Bill Browder's deposition and old episodes of Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan. that are very good, very interesting. So we'll see if Todd can give us permission or not. That's all coming up next hour. And we're taking your calls, 202-521-1320 on The Backstory. So let me ask you this, Rod, and it's an odd question, but unless you know the answer, which is there's a lot of stuff going on. Have you been following Croatia on Twitter at all, Rod?
It's funny you bring that up. A little bit that came across my timeline, I believe Sunday, and the reason I would have saw it is because I'm a big martial arts fan and follower, and there's a MMA fighters that come out of Croatia, so sometimes that news comes across my feed.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, because I'm talking about the politicians over there who are MMA fighters of their own, in their own way. So this, first off, the big story in the world, obviously, right now, if you listen to the news, is the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, except Russia is not doing anything, right? So the crisis is intensifying, and we'll talk about the circumstances and the effects of that in a second. But nothing has changed from the Russia standpoint. Russia's not moving. They're not packing their bags or whatever. You see what I'm saying? Nothing changed. I'll tell you who's increasing the crisis is the U.S. and our lapdog allies like the UK and Australia, people like that. I mentioned
And Canada.
And Canada. Well, they're the lappiest of lapdogs. Canada, and that brings us to Neil Young, who we'll talk about in a second as well. But Canada's, when I say it's the lappiest, they're people who still have royalty on their currency. That's called sucking up, Rod. But and I'm sure I'm going to slaughter these names. The president over there, Zoran Milosevic, and then the prime minister, Andrej Plenković. It's one of those countries where everybody's last name ends with an IC. Does that make sense? It's sort of like the Armenian people, where it's all everyone's name ends with IAN. So it's one of those countries. Here in America, the reason we have American exceptionalism is everybody's got different last names. And there's no common letters. I'm just saying. We're a melting pot, and our letters have all melted, which is a great painting by Salvador Dali on Sesame Street, by the way. But then the other guy over there is the European Member of Parliament, Mislav Kola. I'd say again, it ends with an IC. Kolakovic? I don't know. But he's fantastic, by the way. And if you look him up, I've got a couple things. Have you seen his Twitter profile, by the way?
Not this guy that you're speaking about, no. Okay,
he's the one. He was in the European Parliament, and he gave a speech. They're not playing on two issues, on this supposed crisis and on COVID-19. These guys in the government of Croatia are not playing. So this guy, Mislav, he made a speech in the European Parliament, and he addressed Emmanuel Macron. And he's had millions of people watch he is the Joe Rogan of the European Parliament. Because first off, he is bald. But second off, he's getting millions of views on his videos. He told Macron basically, like, look, you're a hypocrite on COVID-19. You're arguing for one set of rules, but you're playing by another. And I'm not going to, it's one of those things, the reason we don't have a clip for it is he does not speak English. And I don't like clips personally where there's a lot of translation because I don't think it makes for good clips. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it would have had to been me and you talking to make it seem palatable to people.
But you can watch it in subtitles on Twitter, and that's fine. Look, obviously, if you speak a different language, go for it. But it's better to watch on Twitter. But he really told off Emmanuel Macron, and he's not the first time he's done it. And he knows it. And he said, a lot of people are watching his stuff, and nobody in the press is talking about it because he's operating outside the normal, channels. And people are hungry for people. This is what Rogan's proved. And speaking of Canada, let's talk about that. Neil Young, Canadian rocker Neil Young, who I'm a big fan of. I love Neil Young, but not today. Neil Young has said in a post the other day on his website, said Spotify can't have Young and Rogan. So I'll put it like this. If Rogan had said, I don't want Neil Young on Spotify, and Rogan's in a better position to do it because he's getting about 200 million views a month. Neil gets about 6 million views a month. Not bad, way more than me, but come on. When you're getting 6 million, you're not in a position to stop someone with 200 million. But also, you, Neil Young, are being a hypocrite to what you are as an artist. If Joe Rogan had come out and said, I don't want to be on the same platform as Neil Young because he doesn't like Cinnamon Girl or something, I don't know what it would be. But if he'd said that, I'd be siding with Neil Young. I'm going to side with whoever is not in favor of censorship. Does that make sense, Rod?
Yeah, and also for I guess you would say anybody under 28, I guess a lot of people are probably saying who?
Yeah, I guess. Not my kids. Luckily, my son Shane, who was formerly the co-host of Fall Lines, he's a big Neil Young fan, as is Jack, his younger brother. And Jack's not even drinking age yet. But they're both, I was very pleased when they both started listening to, without me, without my influence, because that would make it worse for them. So I shouldn't even say anything. But they were listening to a lot of Neil Young a couple of years ago. They'd go on trips. And Jack had a car at the time. They'd be in the car. They'd be listening to Neil Young and early classic Rush. And I felt I was successful as a parent at that point. But if people don't know who Neil Young is, I can't help it if people are dumb and aren't aware of. Speaking of dumb, just as an example of how music has changed and it's not gotten better. I played a few videos last night from something that gets mentioned in the Beatles film Get Back. It's the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. That was a fantastic TV event the Rolling Stones did. The Who was on it. They did a quick one while he's away. John Lennon, Mitch Mitchell from Jimi Hendrix's band, the drummer, Eric Clapton, and Keith Moon on bass did Your Blues, which is on the Beatles' White Album. And that was fantastic. And a band they put together. Again, it's Clapton, Keith playing bass, John Lennon on guitar and vocals, and Mitch Mitchell on drums. And that's fantastic. And I also played You Can't Always Get What You Want by the Rolling Stones. And it's a live version of that. That is absolutely amazing. It's 1969, 70, right around there. And it's absolutely electric. Mick Jagger he's doing what Mick Jagger does, but he's doing it, he's leaning into the camera and leering, kind of. And it's a great version and a big band. They've got a percussionist, they've got a keyboard player, and Brian Jones, and because he was not dead at that point, so it was better. But that reminded me of how good music used to be. Go ahead, Saul, what were you saying?
It was Keith Richards on bass. because
Wait, what did I
just
say?
looked it up. You said Keith Moon, the drummer from The Who.
Oh, forgive me. Okay, so I said Keith Moon. It was Keith Richards. Keith. Right. But the reason I was thinking about Keith Moon is the version of A Quick One While He's Away. Keith Moon is freaking incredible. I mean, he's an explosive drummer on a slow day, but he's so incredible in this. And so's Entwistle, John Entwistle, the late, great John Entwistle, who's singing in a high falsetto and playing bass. And so Keith Moon was on my mind, but you're right. Thanks for correcting me, Saul. It was Keith Richards playing bass, Keith and the Rolling Stones. Keith Moon would have just eaten the bass or smashed it or something. But watch the Keith Moon, his drumming performance is incredible. And it reminded me that today's music sucks. But the problem is, because it was three top bands at the top of their live performance abilities with good audio in a TV setting with an audience. Very interesting. But I'm not at all happy with what Neil Young's doing. And he should oppose it as an artist. It's also not very, he doesn't like COVID misinformation. Now, by the way, there's a lot, we'll be talking when we have Ian Schilling on the show. Notice I didn't say Ian Anderson, because he's from Jethro Tull. He's the flautist and lead singer. So I'm not confusing everybody, just Keith Moon and Keith Richards. But in my defense, they're both named Keith, which should count for something. And seriously, watch Keith Moon. I was agog. I've seen these before, but Keith Moon was so good. And I know this because I've got my drum set set up here, and I'm old. And I was thinking, could I possibly do what Keith Moon's doing? And I'm like, no, I would die. He's so energetic. And if you watch it, you'll see what I'm saying. And it's so fun to watch. And he's doing his stick. They're not even twirls. The snake dance he does with sticks. That'll make sense if you see it. But I would watch that. I posted those on my Twitter feed last night. But I'm very unhappy with this Neil Young thing. But it's going to be ineffective. If governments around the world can't stop Joe Rogan, Neil, sorry, you're not going to be able to do it. You couldn't stop the Vietnam War, though you kind of tried. So you're not going to be able to do it here with Joe Rogan. Now, Tarif, I see I'll get to your call in 1 second, 202-521-1320. But I had a thought on this whole thing, Rod, that the Ukraine-Russia situation is the Omicron of invasions. Does that make sense? Or I'll explain. But if I say that, does it make any sense at all?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. And anybody who's been following you when you first got on Fault Lines, I feel like we all kind of learned this together, the Ukraine and Russia thing. And we're all kind of standing by and trying to bring people along to the right side of what's going on right now, current affairs.
And the reason I'm comparing it to the Omicron virus is that, first off, have you been seeing, I'm sure you have, that cases, as John Kiriakou, the former co-host on the show, predicted a few weeks ago, are everywhere sliding off. The spike that we had is over. Have you noticed that?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. They can't really pump the fear like they were doing like a month ago.
That's right. But what they can do, and I want to say this, then I'll get to you, Tarif, is they can destroy people's lives without doing that. And they're doing it. Do you know who they're destroying right now? Is Ukrainians. Ukrainians, and I mentioned yesterday, the Ukrainian government, when the U.S. and England and Australia and Canada pulled their people out, Ukraine was like, hey, don't do that. Well, Zelensky, hey, Zelensky, you did it to yourself, pal. I'm not sympathetic. Zelensky's having to go up, they're having to go up on to tell the Ukrainian people, hey, don't pull all your money out of the banks. Don't panic. We don't think Russia's about to invade any second now. We were just implying that we were afraid. Now that they've got people in Ukraine really worried. and it's tanking their economy. Speaking of tanking the economy, anyone who's looked at the stock market lately, we got our own tanking economy right here. And a lot of that tanking is about the war, right? Wall Street doesn't want a war, particularly one on made up. The whole thing's made up. And the spike is imaginary. You know, it's even silly to talk about the crisis. When we talk about the crisis with Russia, what freaking crisis? As we pointed out, there's troops in Russia over 100 miles away. And again, we had Scott Ritter on the show last week. And Scott, who is a big believer in the Russians' military ability, he doesn't think it's a fair fight between Russia and Ukraine, should it come to that. But they're 100 miles away. And whatever you want to say about that, as I said last week on the show on Friday when we had Mark Frost on as well, I said, if they wanted to call it in the media, Russian troops are within striking distance, or they're, by the way, you know what? Russia's right next door to Ukraine. There's always going to be troops within striking distance. Because I got to say, if they weren't in Yelnya over 100 miles away, they'd be somewhere. There's Russian troops in Russia. Russia is next to Ukraine. So everyone chill out. But what you're doing is, and it shows the U.S. does not give a flying F about the Ukrainian people and never has, nor do we care about democracy at all. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I want to get to the calls first. We got Sharif patiently waiting on the line, 202-521-1320. Hey, Sharif, what is on your mind?
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Dunginger, and hashtag no more. I have a comment dealing with Ukraine, Russia, China. Over the weekend, I forgot that I heard today that the Chinese flew 39 aircraft into the ABZ zone, AZB zone, close to Taiwan. So I think China was sending U.S. a message, probably helping out Russia with the situation going on in Ukraine. I was listening to Alice McCurry. He was talking today, and he was explaining that Germany, France, and two other European nations is getting sick and fed up with the U.S. and Britain dealing with Russia, with Ukraine. And now the narrative is starting to lose. The Ukrainian narrative is starting to slip away because people starting to see it's blustering. It's just for show to help out.
That's another reason, by the way, I compare it to the Omicron thing, which is that's a narrative that's slipping from their fingers because nothing's happening. And so it is in this situation. And Alice is right, and Croatia is one of those countries. And I'll talk about that in a second. But go ahead, Sharif.
Oh, yes, it's like they're getting fed up with it. The U.S. moving all these troops around, and we're not really meaning anything because Russia's not doing anything. The U.S. is going to raise it's talking about raising its interest rates, and that's another thing that's affecting the stock market along with the Ukrainian thing. That's why, less borrowing. People can borrow to buy land or buy cars or put money in the stock market. So it's having an impact on that as well. Then we got hyperinflation, all that. For the Ukrainian thing, as long as Russia just keep them to themselves and watch out, then the narrative with the Ukrainian thing is going to start going down and down. And Blank is going to be forced to sit at the table and write that note, that letter to the Russians dealing with security agreements. If not, then we'll see what Russia's going to do, how they're going to respond later. So that's all I got to say today.
Well, no, great call, Sharif. And I got to say, the other problem we got coming is in the factories, it's the microchip problem. You've heard about this, right, Rod?
Oh, yeah. And all the dealerships are trying to buy back people's cars all over the place.
That's right. And by the way, they announced today that home prices went up about 20% in the last year. So there we go. It's a good seller's market. It's not so great a buyer's market. But there's a microchip crisis. And I noticed this the other day because Joe Biden was in Ohio and he was dedicating a new microchip factory. Well, if they're dedicating a new factory, that's not going to be putting out any chips anytime soon. And the problem is there's a crisis now, which is there's not enough chips to build new cars and appliances and a lot of other things. And so we're, once again, day late, dollar short. And that's going to be a big problem where people are going to have trouble getting things. And used stuff, it seems like that's going to be the world we live in for a little while. Like if you're going to get a car, a used car may be your only option, not your best option, but your only option. Now, Croatia, as I mentioned, is part of it. And the prime minister announced that if the U.S. moves in, Croatian troops, Croatia is part of NATO. They've said, we're not going to work with NATO on this. We will pull the Croat troops out and will not be on the flank for any aggression against Russia. And by the way, the president of Ukraine invited, I could have this, it could have been the president who said what I just said, and then the prime minister was invited. Maybe I think it was. The prime minister, Andre, I call him because I can't pronounce his last name, he's invited Vladimir Putin to come to Croatia. And by the way, people are freaking the F out about that as well. Because apparently, look, ginning up a war, that's okay. But inviting a guy to the country to have coffee or something, you know, to talk to him, that's a problem. And this is creating an economic crisis, as I said, in Ukraine and in the U.S. There is a storm of stuff hitting the stock market. The stock market is down again 1% today. 1%, not 1 point. That'd be nothing. And it was even like yesterday at one point, it was down 1,000 points. It ended up closing only 500 points down. But still, I think with everything else Biden's got going on, his advisors should be getting very nervous that none of this is actually going to help. In fact, the only thing I think that Joe Biden could do to increase his popularity, and maybe I'm wrong to say this, Rod, I'm sure I am. Do you know what I think Joe Biden should do? Send Kamala Harris off to fight. Put her right on the front line. You know what I'm saying?
She'll just laugh. She'll just get on a loudspeaker with that laugh, and she'll just, you know, she'll put all the troops. She'll scare all the troops.
Give her whatever helmet Michael Dukakis had in that tank. Give her that, the exact helmet, because they can't get a new helmet because there may be a microchip in it. But put her over there. And I've noticed, the reason I say I'm in a slightly better mood, have you noticed, Rod, that on Twitter, even though some Republicans, elected ones, and some people in the grassroots are yapping about this, most people are seeing through this and they don't want this war at all. Have you noticed? Do you think the average Republican wants this war in any way?
Oh no, I believe the majority of Americans, even if they have some skepticism of Putin, they don't want a war. We're tired of war.
And let me say this: when Jason Goodman comes on top of the hour, because we have more show coming. When Jason comes to guest host next hour, when Jason is here, I have an activism suggestion for everyone to call your congressman, and I'll talk to Jason Goodman about that. Meanwhile, straight out of England, from the UK, Ian Schilling is joining us right after this short break on the best damn talk show in the world, I'm Lou Stranahan, and this is The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we're back. It is time for our first guest on today's show, the great Ian Schilling, commentator from the UK, joining us. Hey, Ian, how you doing?
Hi, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, appreciate you coming on, because there's a lot of news going on in the UK right now related to COVID-19.
There's a lot of news going on everywhere. Yeah.
Well, no, there is. You know, I mentioned that Neil Young, the musician, is trying to shut down Joe Rogan on Spotify. Although he pulled that down. He realized he doesn't have any power. But you know what's going on up in Canada? Have you seen this truck convoy, Ian,
it's
in
massive.
Canada?
It's brilliant. Awesome. Somebody said it's about 70 kilometres long. Okay,
tell people what you've seen Canada.
There. Sorry?
That's right. Tell people what you've seen there.
I've seen loads of videos on different bits of it. I mean, they're not just coming from one place. They're travelling. One convoy is going from British Columbia to Ottawa. So that's one side of Canada right the way across to the other side. And there's other convoys coming from Nova Scotia, which is the other direction, isn't it? They're right on the east. And they're all going to converge on Ottawa on the 29th of January for a massive anti-vax mandate, anti-mandate. Stop the mandates protest. And the truckers they've raised well over $3 million, and they say they're going to stay there and blockade Ottawa and surround the Parliament until Trudeau revokes all the vax mandates, not just the one for the truckers, for everything else as well. Right? And they've raised money to stay there. They've got $3.8 million. Well, it's only been going a few days, and they raised $3.8 million to pay these truckers to blockade it. Right? And there's thousands of trucks, thousands of them.
And so Neil Young, a Canadian, that's your problem. And let me tell you, your other problem is what we'll talk to Ian about here, which is in England, this is actually a possible dream. The idea, I saw Anna Breeze, a great journalist over there, and she was saying people should realize the victory that was won. And we barely talked about it on this show. A few days ago, you had Bojo come out, and they have canceled, like, the government mask. What did they get rid of in England? basically, it shows that you can get these things reversed, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah, they've revoked most of it. I think you still got supposed to wear masks on public transport, but you don't have to wear masks in shops or other internal venues in restaurants or pubs anymore. So they revoked all that. But they were rumours in the press they were going to drop the vax mandate for National Health Service workers, all the health workers. But then they backtracked on that again, so we don't know what's going on, because they're supposed to start firing 70,000 health workers on the 3rd of February if they don't get poisoned with their first shot. If they don't have the first shot by the 3rd of February, they're threatening to fire them all, and there's about 70,000. And there's a huge backlog of cancer patients and heart people with heart problems that need treatment and whatever else. There's a 5 million backlog on the National Health Service, and they fire 70,000 healthcare workers. It's going to get worse. So we don't know what the Tory MPs are going to do. Right? And there's all this Partygate stuff going on. It's all being bandied about by the press. But I think there's something sinister behind all that about how hard they're pushing it. Because the people that are pushing it the hardest are all the globalists. Right? And all the lockdown pushers. Because I think they want to get Johnson out and put someone that's even more hardline in there to impose all these vax mandates.
Well, we'll talk about Partygate. I want to talk to you about what's going on with Bojo and what they're calling Partygate in a second. But let me mention in the U.S., where what we got here is not so much activism action, although there was a rally over the weekend. There were some anti-mandate rallies across the country over here in the U.S. But the big thing is the Supreme Court stepping in, and courts in places like New York saying, nope, you can't have an OSHA mandate, for instance, or saying, pushing back on this. The
Supreme Court ruled against the business mandate, didn't it, for 100 employees? So some
not the
companies are dropping it.
Not the OSHA mandate, the business mandate.
Yeah, some companies are dropping it, like Starbucks and General Electric, and others are pushing it, like Citigroup and CarShot. I never heard of them, but they're a clothing supplier. For their main market seems to be got rednecks, so I don't know how they're going to cope. If they're doing fishing supplies and fishing wear and whatever, and outdoors wear, how are they going to survive if they most of the got people boycott them? They're going to go bust.
No, right. And in some cases, so we've had enough court action. In New York, for instance, they've pushed back on a lot of these mandates, and they said New York is not allowed to do what it did. So, and everybody's fighting this. Whenever they lose, the Biden administration comes out and says, well, we're going to challenge this. But I predicted this months ago. I said, this is going to be challenged in court. They're going to win some and they're going to lose some. And as I say, in the case of the OSHA mandate, they won that one. Harmeet Dillon, the great attorney, who was representing the Daily Wire in the employer mandate suit, she came out and she'd said, I think she was on Tucker the night before the Supreme Court ruled, she said she thinks she would win in the business mandate and the OSHA mandate would stay. And she was exactly right on what the court ended up. And I don't think she was just bragging. But while we're seeing this court action, the thing I think is significant is the human action. It's that I'm not at all convinced. And this is, and I'll once again compare the situation with Ukraine and Russia. I don't even want to call it a crisis, because there's no crisis. There's no Russian invasion.
It's all made up. They're inventing fantasies that Russia's going to invade basket case Ukraine. Why the heck would Russia want to invade the basket case called Ukraine? It's full of corruption. It's totally deindustrialized. Everybody's unemployed and poor, and it's just hopeless. Why would Russia want to pump in $1 billion or $5 billion a year to keep it afloat like America's doing? They wouldn't want to, would they?
And I think that also people they're seeing these stories fall apart in front of their eyes. And the media is still going along with the story even as it's falling apart. And everyone sees that too. So if when you talk to people, the average man in the pub, whoever that is, I don't know who that is, but you know what I'm saying, Ian, is your sense that people are calling BS on this whole thing with the Ukrainian-Russian so-called crisis?
Most people haven't got an opinion on it because they're not interested. They don't care. Most people don't care about it. I mean, they're trying to stir up bloody World War III over this, aren't they? I mean, it's all made up fantasy. Well, when they say that Russia's gonna do a false flag, what they actually mean is the CIA is considering doing a false flag to start a war in Ukraine. It'd be the CIA that does the false flag, not the Russians, wouldn't it? If there is.
Yeah,
one.
and of course, what I think is most likely is in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine, that they're going to, by the way, they've been at war. They've been violating the Minsk agreement and shelling those people in their own country.
Every day for the last 6 years or 8 years, yeah.
That's right. And I think what they could do is they could escalate that, hoping that if they kill enough children in that region, that Russia will say, okay, enough. And then they can say, see, they invaded us. Because Russia...
That's what they tried last time, wasn't it? They've tried this more than once before, haven't they? Up the shelling, moved artillery close to the border and up the rate of shelling and whatever. But the Russians didn't do much. I mean, Russians were doing something under the covers, supplying equipment or stuff, right? Because the Russians aren't going to stop arms, bullets, and shells going across the border or anything. So there'd be soft help like that, but they're not going to put a division of Russian troops in Donbass, are they? They're just not going to do that.
No, they're absolutely not, and they shouldn't. And what they're not going to do is take the bait, right?
Yeah, well, they know that the neocons in Washington are trying to bait them into doing something. Lavrov and Putin are two of the cleverest guys around. They're not going to fall for that, are they?
Now, I've seen this. There's the Irish woman, I forget her name, in the European Parliament, who's a big Assange supporter. You know who I'm talking about?
I do. Somebody Daly.
Yes, right, yes. I forget. It's my bad, but she hasn't come on the show, so I can't be expected to remember her name. I can't even get Keith Moon and Keith Richards straight sometimes. But I've noticed this. There's this Croatian. Have you seen the Croatian guy in the European Parliament?
I don't know. I have seen one Croatian guy. I don't know what bit you're talking about. There's 3 or 4 been standing up.
Yeah, well, the Croatians seem to be standing up quite a bit. And I pointed out, not just in terms of the war, where they said we're not going to join the NATO flank, but also, this is a guy, he recently, Mislav is his first name. I can't get his second name.
Yes.
The guy who went after Macron. So it seems like the European Parliament, which is now, is a good spot to watch some incendiary speeches. The European Parliament, in some ways, seems useless, right?
It is useless, yes.
But on the other hand, it does seem like some rabble-rousers end up in there, and they make good speeches.
There are a couple of dozen, renegades, yes.
Yeah, right. The renegades in the European Parliament are always very interesting to watch. Now, the non-renegade, the head of the UK right now, ostensibly Boris Johnson, Bojo, you've got Partygate. This is that at the height of the lockdowns, I just want to sum this up for people, because over in the States, people have not been... Partygate is gigantically huge in the UK, right? Partygate's, like you point out, it's kind of all they want to talk about.
Yes.
And this was Bojo went to a party, a garden party, during the lockdowns.
He didn't just go to one, he went to several. It wasn't just one.
He went to several. And his excuse was he thought they were allowed. Well, apparently he hadn't been listening to Boris Johnson, right?
Yeah, he didn't know his own rules, yeah.
Well, because there's no way he thought these were allowed, is there?
No, of course they weren't. Bring your own, we're going to have a work event. Bring your own booze.
Oh, that's right.
A work event,
and so it brings to mind a British phrase. I think it's British. Tell me, you're British, so you tell me. But pull the other one.
Yes, exactly. Pull the other one. Quite.
Right. Right. We don't say that in the States.
Pull the other one that's got bells on.
So is that the full phrase?
But the biggest thing about all this, all these staffers and politicians and bureaucrats in Downing Street all knew this virus wasn't that dangerous. It wasn't dangerous for working age people. So they were having all these get-togethers and breaking all the social distancing, not wearing masks, having a wine and cheese parties and whatever else. So they knew. I mean, they had all the data in Downing Street. That the fatality rate was about 0.2%, and it mostly only affected elderly people aged 70 or already ill with something. So normal working age people who are relatively fit and healthy, it wasn't a risk at all. It was just like the flu. So there was no point in doing any restrictions, was there? There never was any point in doing the restrictions, because normal working age people, as long as they weren't, really ill with something else, they weren't at risk. They were just as much risk from the flu as the COVID. So all the restrictions were nonsensical, and they knew it. That's why they broke all the rules. I mean, that Neil Ferguson went to visit his married lover during the peak of the lockdown about April or May in 2020, didn't he? He knew it was all nonsense as well, and he was the one that started it all.
Now, explain your theory that you're suspicious there's almost too much Partygate coverage. Explain that to people, Ian.
Yeah, well, they're pushing it all. I mean, Boris Johnson is not pushing the vax mandates and the mask mandates and the lockdown rules anymore. So he's still got the NHS mandate, but he's dropped any plans for vax passes. Right, so this obviously isn't the agenda that the globalists want. I mean, von der Leyen and Macron and whatever in Europe are all pushing vax passes like there's no tomorrow, aren't they? Right, so they're pushing it hell for leather. Right? And Boris Johnson has said no, he's not going to do vax passes. So the people that are controlling one half of Parliament, right, the globalists, the pro-EU Remainers and all that lot are all saying, well, we'll get rid of Johnson and we'll appoint somebody else, right? So somebody like the current health minister, Sajid Javid, who's pushing the jabs, right, who used to work for Deutsche Bank, who's a pro-EU globalist, a banker. Right, oh, he'll be ideal. We'll put him in and he'll do all these vax passes for us. So somebody like that. Or there's Jeremy Hunt, who's a globalist, who used to be the health minister before Matt Hancock. Right? They might want to put him in because he came second in the leadership contest. Jeremy Hunt was the favoured candidate of the globalist pro-Remainers, right, when they had the leadership battle in 2019. So there's rumours that they might try and stick him in, and he'd be terrible. Right, so if Bojo goes, who are they going to put in and replace him? Because the replacement might be a hell of a lot worse. I can't see they're going to put somebody good in that's been anti-lockdown from the beginning. They're just not going to do that, are they? Right? I mean, there's maybe 10 MPs that have been anti-lockdown from the start, are fairly prominent, who could be candidates, but they're not going to install one of them.
So the Tories, the equivalent of the Republicans, kind of, for Americans trying to figure out what the hell we're talking about. You've got his chief political rival, in a sense, the head of what would be the Democrats, in a sense, the Labor Party, It's not an exact comparison, but Keir Starmer.
Well, it's pretty similar. It is pretty similar. I mean, Keir Starmer is a globalist corporatist. He works for large corporations, multinational corporations, and globalist oligarchs. Right? That's exactly describes Joe Biden and the Dems in the US, who work for Soros and Co.
Right, they're millionaires who say they're working for the people. Right, the line is we're working for the people, but you know they're millionaires and billionaires. So Keir Starmer, he's been trying to use this to oust, to get. When this comes up in the news over here, I hear they're using this to try to get Johnson Bojo to resign. And Keir Starmer, where does he fit in terms of mandates and stuff like that?
He's been pushing Bojo for harsher restrictions all the time. For the last 18 months, he's been pushing for harsher lockdowns, more vax mandates, more curfews, more shutting down businesses. He's absolutely worse than Bojo. Absolutely worse. Keir Starmer is a Blairite. He's the exact mirror copy of Tony Blair, right? Mass murdering psychopath globalist. That's what Keir Starmer is. He's Tony Blair. He's the one that asked Sweden not to drop the false charges against Julian Assange and kept him imprisoned in the Ecuadorian embassy for 6 years, right? In 2012, right, when Assange escaped, you know, he sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, didn't he? And the Swedes were going to drop the charges, and Keir Starmer was the equivalent of the Attorney General, and he asked Sweden not to drop the charges so they could keep Assange imprisoned in the embassy. So that's him.
Or Mike Pompeo could try to murder him. Yeah, could plot to murder him right down the street from Harrods, because that's exactly where you want a gun battle, is right outside a huge department store, right?
Yeah.
Now, so Keir Starmer, the head of the Labour Party, is worse. But what they're saying is, and they're trying to increase the pressure to get Bojo to quit. Do you see Bojo resigning, quitting, getting kicked out, a vote of no confidence? Is this the end of Bojo, or is that just a bunch of a pipe dream?
I don't know what's going to happen. It's probably 50-50. He's in trouble. I couldn't say one way or the other whether he's going to survive or not, because it's close, right? It's 50-50.
No, that's very, very interesting. But as you say, it's interesting that it's being pushed by the pro-lockdown people. And by the way, we mentioned Croatia before. The other thing Croatia did recently as a country is they had this big Enough is Enough petition, which is against the vaccine passports.
Yeah.
But even
Eastern
just the
Europe
fact that
in general is protesting against vax passports. Not just Croatia, is it? It's all of those countries. Slovakia and Slovenia and Serbia is against them. Romania and Bulgaria all protesting against it. So it's most of Eastern Europe.
Now, but that's why we've got countries, I think, like Poland saying they're not going to join NATO in a war against Russia. I think that for a lot of them, it's the timing on all this is, I'll put it like this, where there's a clear commonality is we have a skeptical, weary public. They're tired of this stuff, right? Yeah. And we're seeing that all around the world, I think. And as you point out, we're seeing it quite a bit in Eastern Europe, this weariness, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the Czech Republic, they got a new government and they've scrapped all the vax mandates and all the mask orders. They just came in, and on Friday or something, they announced they were going to ditch all the policies of the previous government, and all the vax mandates and mask mandates were out the window. They've thrown them out. Switzerland's now ditched all the vax passes, so that's another one that's going. Ireland's ditched the vax passes. So there's a split now in Europe. There's a definite split. Right? All the real EU fanatics like Macron and the Germans and von der Leyen, who's the EU Commission president, are all pushing the vax passports. But there's quite a few countries now say they're not going to do them. Like Sweden's now saying they're not going to do them, and they don't have to have a test. Travellers into Sweden don't have to have a COVID test anymore. Right, so Sweden's against it. Denmark is going to announce tomorrow, apparently they're not going to have vax passes, and they're going to drop all their COVID restrictions. That's another one. There's Sweden, Denmark, Ireland, Czech Republic. Switzerland's not in the EU, but it's Europe, isn't it? So there's quite a few. And there'll be Hungary and Orban who'll be against it as well. Right? And some of the other Eastern European ones, like Slovenia and Croatia, like you said.
But meanwhile, on the street in places like the Netherlands, right, we've seen big protests recently.
Yeah.
The Dutch.
There's lots all over the place. Well, the Germans are in trouble. The German press printed a thing that the German government is worried about all these anti-mandate protests because they're happening in 1,000 locations across Germany. 1,000 towns and cities across Germany in the last week or so. Right, some of them are fairly small with 50 or 100 people. Others are 20,000 and whatever.
Now, Ian Schilling, we're almost out of time. Tell people where they can find your stuff.
Well, I'm on Telegram as Ian56 News, and I'm now on Getter as Ian56A.
There we go. Now, let me ask you about this. We've been dealing with much noticeably higher prices. They just announced today home prices went up 20%, but people see it at the gas station and at the grocery store as well. Are you seeing higher prices where you are in the UK?
Yeah, and UK and Europe, yes. They're reporting the highest inflation for decades, yes.
Yeah, and they're not just reporting it. You're seeing it when you go to buy stuff, right?
Yeah, in the food store, yeah, you could see the bread going up 10% or whatever, yeah.
Now, are you seeing one of the things we've had here is shortages in some places where there's empty shelves here in some places. Have you noticed empty shelves recently where there were full shelves, or is that not hit England?
Not where I am, and there's been no reports of that in the UK or anywhere in Europe that I'm aware of. So there's not the same supply crisis that there is in the US and Canada.
Yeah, very interesting. Anyway. Well, that's right, because that's part of what I think is creating the weariness for people. It's just that idea that some of these things may be happening. But again, Ian, always fantastic to talk to you. How's the weather, by the way? It was 5 degrees here in South Dakota last night. 5 frickin' degrees this morning.
That's 27 below you're talking about, eh?
Well, below, yeah, because you use a different system. So that's Fahrenheit. That's right, 5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's well below
40,
freezing.
40 Fahrenheit here lately. That's about it. It hasn't gone above 40, so 36 or 40. Just above freezing.
Okay, there we go. So it's worse, but it's always worse. Every time I talk to people in Russia, it's always colder in South Dakota. That's what I've learned. Ian Schilling, thanks so much for joining us. Fantastic appearance as usual. Coming up after this short break, Jason Goodman is guest hosting for the next hour, and we'll be talking to Todd from Center for Immigration Studies about what he learned down at the border. That and more, taking your calls, 202-521-1320. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back live for the second hour of the best damn talk show in the world. The show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory. I really want to thank Ian Schilling. Always fun to talk to Ian. And everyone who listens to the show knows this. I like getting information from people on the ground. So him saying, for instance, that there's not shortages at the stores right now, that's interesting to me. It's not that things are cheery, and I'll talk to our guest host about that in a second. But it's good to hear stuff from people who actually live someplace, have actual experience, as opposed to a lot of the media. Because the media right now is so out of touch. It's like, do they never go out? Are they not aware of what people actually care about? Apparently not, by the way, is the answer. But joining us as our guest host this hour it's Tuesday, so it's Truth Tuesday, Crowdsource the Truth host, Jason Goodman. Hey, Jason, how you doing?
I'm well, Lee. How are you?
I'm groovy, thanks. And I've got a couple of ideas I wanted to run by you.
Sure.
About saving the world. We'll talk about that in a second. And we've got, from the Center for Immigration Studies, we got Todd Berenson coming up later this hour on The Backstory. Okay, so let me. I'm going to riff a little bit on the thing I was just talking about. I really think the media and politicians are uniquely clueless right now. It's not just that everybody's watching these narratives like COVID-19 slip away like sand through people's fingers, right? This Omicron thing has turned out to be nothing, right?
Yeah.
There was a big spike. The cases went up. Now the cases are going back down again. And this Russian invasion they've been talking about since literally November. There's no Russian invasion, yet the U.S. is freaking out like the troops are on the move or something. And there's nothing happening. Meanwhile, everybody's watching. Everybody out there, normal people, are watching all this. And then when you turn on the news, they act like there's a real crisis with Ukraine and Russia. And people are going, I don't see it. What am I missing here? And meanwhile, and I'll tell you who's the worst, is politicians. They're really weak. And I'll say this, and I mean it. It's what I would call self-imposed weakness. The Republicans are awful on this. I'm going to make an argument that uses exactly the same premises in some sense. Biden is out talking about democracy a lot. You've noticed that. He talks a lot about democracy. Okay? Yeah. I'm not seeing a single, if a Republican politician stood up and said this, they would be applauded. They would have said, so this is with the idea that just being defensive sometimes is not enough. You can't just be defensive. Sometimes you need to not be offensive, but be bold at least. I'm going to make a bold proposal. The U.S., it's not just that the U.S. should not be waging a fake crisis between Russia and Ukraine. I'll take it a step further. The U.S. should recognize that the people of Crimea voted democracy, right, to leave Crimea and become part of Russia. And they did it after a coup in Ukraine that was foisted on the people of Ukraine by Barack Obama and George Soros.
exactly what I wanted to talk to you about, Lee, because everything that's going on right now under Joe Biden just feels like a continuation of what they were doing with Obama. And this is what the controversy was about. Joe Biden manipulating the politics of Ukraine, telling them to fire the attorney general, or what was the guy that he wanted him to fire, who he said, son of a bitch? He was fired.
Prosecutor General, yes.
Yeah. So Joe Biden's been monkeying around in Ukraine for a long, long time. He had the assistance of big tech to prevent us from hearing about that at a time when conceivably it could have made a difference. Now he's the president. And I mean, you've mentioned in the past, whether it was on Crowdsource the Truth or on here, a mutual friend of ours, you and I both know this guy, and he's living now in Ukraine. He married a Ukrainian woman, and he's living there. I was texting with him yesterday, and I said, are people going nuts trying to get out? And he said, no, most people don't seem to be concerned about it.
That's very interesting. Now, is he up in Kyiv? Is that where he is?
Yeah, yeah. So like you were talking to Ian about what's going on in the supermarkets there, I've spoken to many, I've mentioned it many times. I happen to live in a building in New York City. The very first Whole Foods that ever came to New York City is in the building that I live in. So I haven't seen the types of empty shelves that are being shown on the news, but I think that is probably happening for two reasons. First of all, the prices have been a little bit more stable in Whole Foods because I think it's famously a lot more expensive than if you were to survey supermarkets all around the country. It's definitely on the high end. And secondarily, I know that one of the things that Whole Foods does, as you go around the country, each store will have different products because they try to locally source them. So I wonder if that different approach to doing business as a supermarket has maybe insulated them from some of these long supply chain delays that have been affecting other sort of big national chains like Walmart and some of the larger supermarkets that most people shop at.
Well, so this relates to what I was talking about. I was hinting at with this self-imposed weakness. You know what some of it has to do with is a self-victimization mentality. And when you start to see yourself as a victim, and I'll say this bluntly, Republicans see themselves as victims, right? You start to think, well, what's the point in me even trying to stop being a victim? Well, that's the victimization mentality has affected you. So what Republicans don't realize, elected Republicans, I'm going to say this. There's two ways in which they don't want to do anything bold. They don't want to, and the people want desperately people to do something bold. Every time a politician comes out and acts like they've got a pair, does that make sense? I can't be more explicit because, we're the FCC, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
The people are very attracted to that. You notice that, right?
Well, Jim Jordan, I think, certainly Trey Gowdy used to do a lot of that.
And they weren't even really, they would
just yelling,
make noises. Right.
Right.
But on this thing that's going on with Ukraine, I'm going to go a step further than just saying, well, we shouldn't fight with them. The U.S. needs to recognize the will of the people of Crimea. The United States needs to strike a blow for democracy and say Crimea is part of Russia, and we don't want to hear anything more about it. The Crimean people voted. That's that democracy thing we talk about all the time. They voted. They voted in overwhelming numbers to be part of the Soviet Union again.
Well, of Russia.
Right, Russia, not Soviet. Soviet Union's been gone for decades.
Yeah.
But be part of Russia again. But at least I didn't say to be part of Keith Richards again. But that was a mistake I made earlier. But my point is Crimea is part of Russia now. That's a done deal. They're happy. They've got a nice bridge and everything. Crimea is part of Russia, and the U.S. should recognize it as a statement of advocacy for democracy. We see what you did, Crimea. You had a referendum, and you decided to determine your future and you decide you want to be part of Russia. So you are. The United States needs to stand up and recognize that, and they need to realize that what happened in Kiev was an anti-democratic coup. Viktor Yanukovych's government had been elected by the people. The election had been certified. That's all out there. That's part of history. Then there was a coup. And the U.S. should say, we don't support coups. And I'll tell you who should really say it is Republicans. Every elected Republican should say, we don't support the Obama-Biden-created coup in 2014 that they did in conjunction with George Soros.
That's what I was going to say, is that they'd be lying if they said that, because there's a lot of evidence that indicates that they financially and logistically did support that coup.
But you know what I'm saying? They should say, as Republicans, if nothing else, they should say, they should call it the Obama-Biden coup, right?
Yeah.
The Obama-Biden-Soros coup.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you who was central to this. I hinted I would mention this earlier. When I was researching Russiagate initially back in 2016, 2017, the Atlantic Council came up constantly. People like Dmitry Alperovitch from CrowdStrike, the cybersecurity company.
Yep.
He was with the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is NATO. The Atlantic Council was, in other words, the Atlantic Council is basically the PR arm of NATO. Okay?
Huh?
The Atlantic Council was behind Russiagate. Now that we're going along with, I see Republicans doing this all over the place. Well, they're advocating for Ukraine's right to join NATO. NATO ain't our friend. You follow me? If you're at all a Trump supporter, NATO is not your friend. They're not a friend of America's either. They were engaging. NATO was part of a coup against Trump. Because everything that happened to Trump was very anti-democratic. If they want to yap about democracy, mean it. What happened to Donald Trump, did you view it that way, that it was trying to get Donald Trump out through a Ukraine-backed coup? That second impeachment was a Ukrainian-backed coup in the United States. It failed, but they were trying to overthrow the president. Officials in Ukraine, we know this, were trying to overthrow our country and thwart our democratic will, the people who voted for Donald Trump, right? Do we have a right to self-determination? Well, lots of NATO officials and lots of Ukrainian officials don't think so. And that's the way they acted. But do you think that people are ready for bolder political leaders? Not crazier, but bolder?
Lee, I look around and I see people who are either overwhelmed by what's going on or completely unaware of what's going on. I mean, people who I even think are intelligent. Somebody posted something about, they're upset that Ron DeSantis put out a statement of monoclonal antibodies. Apparently, the FDA or the CDC said that they're less effective than initially anticipated, so they're not making them available to anybody anymore. And I don't understand how less effective becomes you can't have it. I mean, unless it's hurting people. I've been hearing a lot of stories, including on Sunday at the anti-mandate rally, there were a lot of people on stage who were giving firsthand testimony about how they personally had been permanently injured by these vaccines. And I just don't believe we've had a scientific accounting of what has gone on. So as far as whether people are ready for bold politicians, I think people are so confused and so unable to form sensible decisions that they don't know what they're ready for.
Well, see, that's part of what I think would be appealing about bold leadership. Somebody coming forward and just being, and I'll tell you, a lot of times politicians, having worked with politicians in the past, they're a lot more scared than everyone realizes. And I think what we're talking about with Ian, these protests that are happening around the world, it's not a U.S. phenomenon. In fact, I got to say this. When I look at Croatia, they're much bolder. When I look at the street activism, or the road activism, like they got, you're following this Canadian convoy, right?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing that kind of activism in the U.S. Are you?
Well, maybe not on the same kind of scale, but I do think that, you know, what we saw in Washington, D.C. and what, you know, people are trying to do in New York, you're right, it's on a smaller scale. And I mean, I haven't been on the ground in those other countries. What I see in the events here in New York are people who I believe are trying to infiltrate and disrupt that, you know, false flag type people. And you were talking about Ukraine trying to overthrow our government. I've seen allegations of known Ukrainian, you know, criminals basically there at January 6th. And I have a very, very strong feeling that the overwhelming majority of people who entered the Capitol on January 6th were agents provocateurs, and those that weren't were the most gullible who were incited by them. And you know what? You've convinced me, Lee. People are ready for bold leadership because people are scared, people are confused. That's why they're being, you know, sort of whipsawed from one direction to another. And someone who is bold, decisive, and intelligent, that's what we need. Because what we have is the opposite of that. There's a headline right here on CNN that the Biden administration just minutes ago has withdrawn the COVID-19 vaccination and testing regulation aimed at large business. That doesn't seem like a president who's convinced of his beliefs. Seems like a guy who goes with the flow. You know, you had the Supreme Court overthrow his judgment. You had the New York State Supreme Court overthrow Kathy Hochul's mask mandate. And Biden is, you know, he sticks his finger in the air and sees which way the wind is blowing. And then he calls Peter Doocy a son of a bitch or whatever.
A dumb son of a bitch, yeah.
Right. It's terrible.
It wasn't. Yeah, and by the way, if Trump had done that, there would have been hearings.
Impeachment.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll say this, too. A lot of what we're seeing, though, is at the end of the day, people are not, they're not getting, I was talking to a friend of mine last night about defeating Trump. And let me explain how and why I think it's important. I think it's important for people to have those discussions, even if they ultimately support Trump. But I happen to believe we can do better than Donald Trump. I think at the end of the day, you know, I was thinking, I tweeted this out. Let me just give you a fact about Donald Trump. He had his daughter in the White House, whose best friends, Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka's best friends, are Huma Abedin, Chelsea Clinton, Dina Powell from Goldman Sachs,
wow,
and a Chinese spy, Wendy Jiang.
Right, yes.
Right? I'll put it like this. Hunter Biden has got crack whores, sure. But I actually would, I think, prefer the crack whores to Huma Abedin, Chelsea Clinton, Dina Powell, right? Because that, to me, that's ideologically, crack whores are not known for their heavy ideological indoctrination. It's more crack.
Yeah, Ian was talking a lot about Pompeo and what he was doing to try to keep Julian Assange in jail and end his life. And Trump presided over that. And, you know, whether it is, I don't want to get into this, oh, Trump is in on it and you're an idiot if you don't see that. I don't know if Trump is in on it. I don't know if Trump tried to do the right thing. But I don't know. But I think it's probably a substantial challenge. I mean, I see what I'm doing and I see what other people are able to do behind the scenes to prevent me from doing that. And they make it very inconvenient for me to just come out and describe exactly what's going on. So these are complicated entanglements, but whatever the explanation is, Trump had his at-bat, and he did not hit a home run. He didn't even get any, runners in for that matter. And I've said this before. I'm not sure if I've said it on this show. I feel very much about Trump the way I do about my ex-wife. I could think back to when we were married and everything was great. But in the end, it didn't work. And although I don't want to have bad feelings or say anything bad, and I still do have some good feelings, I'm not going back to that. I got an ad the other day for Rand Paul for president, just making a simple, straightforward, to-the-camera appeal for what he wants to do and why you should support his campaign. And I said to myself, you know what? I think Rand Paul for president makes a lot of sense because public health has become such a critical issue. Having an MD president who could push back on some of these so-called experts and the way he's at least making an effort to bring Fauci's wrongdoing to light, I think I would vote for Rand Paul.
Well, I think also, let me tell you the problem with Rand. Okay. And I've talked about this before. We've had the great Daniel McAdams, who co-hosts a show with Rand's dad, Ron Paul.
Right.
And I'll tell you what I think Rand Paul should say. One reason you should vote for me is I have a long career as a libertarian. In other words, he should own the word libertarian. He should not run from it. And he should say it for this reason. He should say, let me explain why that matters to you. Because I have a set of philosophical principles. So you know where I'm going to come down on something like vaccine mandates, because I'm a libertarian.
Right.
We're opposed. Libertarians are philosophically opposed. It's not just we don't like him today. One of the problems with Trump is he had no ideology. He had no principles at the end of the day. I know he liked hugging the flag and everything. I'm sure he likes the country. But you know what? A lot of people, every Democrat talks about how they love America. That's not sufficient, in my opinion.
Trump is very good at sales. He knows what to say to get you to buy. And if the product is Trump, that's what he was doing.
No, that's right. And I think a guy like Rand Paul coming forward and saying, I have a set of principles. It's time for libertarians. Because I think, look, take the two big issues going on right now. COVID, I'll throw in the economy as a third issue. But COVID and the war that's being ginned up with Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
I can tell you what libertarians think about those issues based on the fact that they're libertarians. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And it's not always the case with every issue. But on those issues, and any libertarian is going to say they're opposed to the Fed, and they think the Fed has too much influence. And I think it's the libertarian time. But Danny McAdams has been on the show, and he said even people like Ron Paul are shying away from using the word libertarian. And I think that's the idea. That's why I say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's self-imposed weakness. I say own it. I say it's not a dirty word for people anymore.
But is he doing that, Lee, because the average person watching CNN hears anything other than Republican or Democrat and they're not voting for that person?
Well, he's a Republican. Right. He's a Republican with libertarian principles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. He's trying to sort of stay in the middle there and not go out to the edge. He wants the base, the Republican base. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see who will run from the Republicans in 2024. I anticipate Rand Paul. I anticipate Ron DeSantis, Trump.
Ted Cruz, we know for sure.
Ted Cruz. He can't be president. I'm sorry. I'm not. Ted Cruz, we still need to know what Rafael Cruz was doing outside the International Trade Mart in New Orleans in August, what he was doing standing 3 rows deep 30 seconds before Kennedy was shot. You and I have evaluated that very famous photo of the motorcade where Rafael Cruz is standing there with Antonio Veciana. It's very strange. And I should also point out to our listeners, Ted Cruz was so deferential, let's even call it sycophantic, when he was speaking with Alan Dershowitz I have no respect for anyone who cannot see that Alan Dershowitz is nothing but a liar.
Well, we had Yakov Smirnoff on the show. Yakov Shapiro, forgive me.
Yeah, yeah.
See, I did the same thing that Carmine talked about yesterday. When you start to say Yakov S., Smirnoff is what comes to mind at first. But Yakov Shapiro, the great rabbi who's an anti-Zionist, and I'm going to say this. Ted Cruz is a perfect example of somebody. Here's the reality on the Republican side. The money is in supporting Israel. That's where the money is. And literally, when Sheldon Adelson was alive, he would supply a lot of that money. And if you look at a guy like Bannon goes to AIPAC. He's friends with Nina Rosenwald. He's very close to Nina Rosenwald, who's head of the Zionist Organization of America. And by the way, the Zionist Organization of America sounds like something that a redneck Klan member would make up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you heard somebody talking about, we got to watch out for the Zionist Organization of America, it doesn't sound, it's almost like the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, to a lot of people, this is a real Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan. But when people first hear it, people go, that can't be real. That's got to be something they made up for an episode of CSI or whatever.
Yeah, it's like a marketing term.
There's a real Zionist Organization of America. Nina Rosenwald was the head of it, and she's been pushing a lot of the anti-Islam stuff, and she's close to Bannon. Bannon's a guy who got where the money is, and this is why he was hooked up with the Mercers, for instance, or this new Chinese billionaire. Some people sniff out money like a truffle pig. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And Bannon's one of those guys. And Ted Cruz strikes me as that with a mullet. Ted Cruz is not dumb, right? So he knows where the money is. The money is in blindly supporting Israel no matter what they do or say. Because there are certain billionaires, and like I say, Adelson ran that pack, that will support your candidacy if they know you're a solid vote for whatever the hell Israel wants. And that is one of the things I'll say about Donald Trump. He became exactly that. And Donald Trump, you notice, they screwed you. They threw you under the bus. Netanyahu's first phone call, the first phone call Joe Biden got of congratulations was from Ben Netanyahu, right?
Yeah.
So it didn't work out. And Trump sort of gets it, but he doesn't get that he should call Jared Kushner and literally, I will trust Donald Trump that it would have a better second term if I see him literally kick Jared Kushner's ass. I don't know what restaurant they hang out, Peter Luger's, whatever. I don't know where they go.
Where they go? No, not Peter
I have no
Luger's.
idea.
They're not going to Brooklyn. No.
Well, I was just trying to think of a good, probably too good. But whatever eatery
now.
they,
yeah,
right. Which Florida, I'll just say, generally not known for its eateries. Yeah, Joe's Crab.
Nice, Palm Beach has some high. They'll have your Morton's Steakhouses and those kind of things out there that I'm sure they're going to. But I wanted to ask you before, and it slipped my mind, Lee. The Atlantic Council and that magazine, The Atlantic, that's owned by Lorena Jobs or Lorene Jobs.
Different things.
Not
different
related
things
at all. Okay.
They're not related at all, except I will say that, this idea of Atlanticism is, which is hooking up the U.S. and the U.K., is an important concept. So I don't know where they got the name The Atlantic from, but the Atlantic Council is different. And by the way, Soros was a big donor to the Atlantic Council. Big donor, millions. And not a shock at all. Very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We got more coming up. We got from these. Are you as a writer? Are you familiar with the Center for Security Policy?
I do believe I've heard of it before.
Center for Security Policy is great. I've been talking to Mark Krikorian for years about the issues of immigration. Coming to the next guy we've had on the show one time before. Todd Benjamin's coming up. He's a writer. He's been doing videos down there on the border. Something you know something about. YouTube hiding the videos. YouTube censorship. We'll talk to him about that and other topics. Todd Benjamin, right after this on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want them recorded.
Let's talk about that. Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Hi to everyone driving around Washington. Nice to talk to you. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory with our guest host on Tuesdays. It is Truth Tuesdays with Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth. Hey, Jason.
Hi again, Lee. How are you?
Good. Now, we're having some trouble getting Todd from the Center for Security, Center for Immigration Studies, forgive me.
Yeah.
Center for Security
like
Policy, totally different.
Right. I have questions about that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing about Center for Security Policy, who I've done work for, and I know a lot of people. They're 100% pro-Zionist, getting all their money. That's where they get their money from. And
they got a lot of ex-CIA people there, too.
They do. And that can be okay, you know, if they expose the CIA.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It can also be not okay. So we'll have to look into that separately.
Yeah, but I don't mind it, by the way, if people are like up front that they used to work at the CIA. What I don't like is the Operation Mockingbird stuff where they keep that from you. But let me do this while we're waiting to see if we get Todd on the line. I'm going to do to you what I did to Carmine yesterday. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'll give you a couple minutes to think about it.
Sure.
That I asked people on Twitter. And by the way, if people out there in the radio audience want to call and give their answer, 202-521-1320. The question is this. If you could ask Vladimir Putin one question, you get one question, that's it, what would it be? And I'll give you a couple minutes, I'll riff on something else so you can think about it a little bit. Mm-hmm. Because if you got one question, you want to make it count.
Yeah.
So it's not, who are you
wearing?
wearing?
I saw the tweet this morning on @Stranahan on Twitter, and I was going to answer, but I thought, boy, this is a really good question from Lee. And if that, like, let's say something happened where I was going to go to Russia and I had an opportunity to interview Putin. And I mean, you've just posed this question to me in a format that's similar to a game show. So I'll answer it in the same format. I would want to use my call a friend option, and I would definitely have a conversation with you, Lee, before I went and spoke with Putin, because I'd want to focus my question. I want to know about Bill Browder, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and how the whole collapse of the Soviet Union and the plundering of those resources, the question would have to be about that.
Well, no, I agree. And that is the central thing. For anybody who's new, and hopefully we're getting some new people, because I got to say, we are the best radio show to listen to as this ginned up Russia-Ukraine crisis is going on.
Yeah.
Would you not agree with that, Jason?
I do, and I'm very concerned about it, Lee, because I think that Joe Biden wants to do this war so that the mess in Ukraine becomes so huge that any questions about Burisma or what his son might have been doing there, or any money that he might have gotten, or any manipulation of this $1 billion loan guarantee to fire the prosecutor general, he wants all of that to be washed away in the flood of war.
So there's two. So let me explain, though. I think it's so when we're ascribing, and I understand this, when people are trying to understand a story like this, they want something they can hang a hook on. In other words, I'll put it like this. Everybody understands greed, right? If I say, well, they did, person A did this thing because they wanted to make money.
Right.
No one goes, I've never heard of that motivation before. What are you saying? People do things for money? What?
Right.
Right. It's the same thing with jealousy or whatever. If you hear a story and the story goes like this: a guy went into a hotel room, he caught his wife in bed with another guy, and he shot him. You understand that story. I don't have to explain more, right? Because, and again, I'm not even saying I agree with that mentality, but everyone goes, the guy was jealous. He was upset that he felt betrayed or whatever. Yeah. That's why I shot him. I don't have to explain, a guy walks in.
That's legal in certain countries, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, to shoot the person, not to sleep with this guy's wife.
No, but shooting the guy, I think in some countries is you can not go to jail for that.
It's called a crime of passion, actually.
Yeah.
It's a defense, a crime of passion. And if you actually analyze that, it doesn't. Because if you break it down logically, without getting into it, if you break it down logically and you say, okay, so let me try to understand this. I'm going to lay this out. This person was involved with this woman. She wanted some variety in her sex life. She'd slept with this guy for some period of time, and she wanted to try different body parts or people, or see how different people make love. Right? Does that make sense?
Well, it's a unilateral decision.
Well, that's fine. But because she wanted to do that, if she'd wanted to talk to other people and the guy had shot her, everyone would go, well, that's a bit
Seems
much.
Extreme. Yeah.
But for some reason on the sex thing, people are willing to go, okay, no, you can't have any variety. Nope. That's it.
Well,
you got to sleep with one. I think
you're dealing with law of the jungle type stuff, I mean, if a lion comes home and there's another lion there getting down with Mrs. Lion, somebody's getting eaten.
That's actually, I don't know about lions or these lions who sound very jealous, but that's not, there are plenty. The animal kingdom has a variety of ways that people handle. There are some animals, like there's a reason men are often compared to dogs, for instance.
Why is that?
Dogs are not monogamous. You may have noticed that.
Right. They just want to impregnate as many dogs as possible. And they don't
That's
get jealous either.
Right. You've never heard a dog go, wait a second, Fifi was with Bowser? Wait, what happened? Except maybe at a French Sha-Na-Na concert. Maybe you've heard that. But
take her out for a milk
with dogs, you never hear that. And so what I'm saying is, but there are some species, I believe penguins mate for life. I'm not sure. I've never dated a penguin.
Very cold.
Right. So I'm saying different species actually handle monogamy, if that's what you want to call it, differently.
And you know, at the risk of sounding racistly, I think pretty much all penguins look identical. So that might be the reason.
Black and white tuxedo lives matter. Let's put that up. Now, but my point is, some stories are very easy to tell. A very easy to tell is this guy did something because he was greedy. He won money. Everyone goes, okay, I got it. Mm-hmm. So if I say Joe Biden's motivations in Ukraine were money, like Burisma or whatever, that's easy for everyone to get. But I don't believe that's the clear motivation with Biden. And the reason I say that is because I know a lot of the history. Joe Biden has been dealing. So there's part of what's going on with Ukraine is greed. Part of what's going on is really longstanding, deep animosity over cultural, racial, and religious divides. So, for instance, Ukraine is a country that has had deep divisions, and it typically runs along eastern-western lines, about identity. And I've talked about, for instance, if we talk about Ukrainian Nazis, there are Ukrainians, and you can find them. It's easy to find interviews with them if you go onto YouTube and start looking for it. With Ukrainians, they have big neck tattoos or something like that. They're part of Pravy Sector or the Svoboda Party. And they believe in Slavic nationalism, racist nationalism, by which they mean everyone knows, you know, Hitler thought the Germans, like the Aryan supremacy, right?
Yeah.
The pure German. Well, a lot of Ukrainians believe in that, but it's about pure Slavicness. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And a lot of them see Russians as not pure Slavs. And they view the Asian influence as and by the way, there's some parts of Ukraine where they're still upset about the Mongol invasions. Because the Mongols did come in and mess things up. The Mongols were not making friends, right, although the barbecue got popular. But these Slavs, it's hard for people to understand because they don't have that bias. If I said they hate Jews, everyone goes, okay, I've seen people who hate Jews. I get that. But if when you talk about pure Slavic, they don't know what that means because that's not, does that make sense? They don't relate to it. But a lot of these people in Ukraine, they talk about that. And the racist Nazi ones, the Banderites, part of the way they view things, and I didn't understand it at all myself. It took me a while to get it, and I still am sure I don't completely get it. But part of what's going on is those kind of divisions about issues that most Americans literally can't even grasp. Like, wait, they're mad because they think the Russians aren't pure Slavs? What the hell does that mean? Right? Most people would go, right, I don't even know what they're talking about. But that division is extremely real for a lot of people in Ukraine. Then part of it is over things like a lot of Ukrainians, like the Holodomor, they view it like their Holocaust. And if you say, well, the Holodomor was a famine that happened in the 30s in Ukraine. But it killed like 1.5 million Ukrainians, but it killed like nearly 3 million Russians, that famine. Now, the way the Ukrainians like to put it in is Stalin hated Ukraine, Stalin's Russian, so he intentionally killed people, millions. But it was a famine that killed Russians as well. You follow me? But in the same way that questioning the Holocaust gets some people really upset, and by questioning it, I don't mean saying there's no Holocaust. I mean, if you dispute the actual numbers of the Holocaust at all,
they get upset. Right.
Some people get very upset. There's a guy knew David Cole, and he was Jewish. And he went on the Phil Donahue show. He'd researched stuff. And he had some questions about the numbers on the Holocaust.
He got run out of there, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. He was attacked completely. And again, he wasn't saying there was no Holocaust. He wasn't saying Hitler's awesome. He just said, I think it was less than they're saying it was. But you noticed how just saying that, some people, that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
And you're the worst person in the world. So for a lot of Ukrainians, questioning the Holodomor at all, literally asking a question about going, well, didn't more Russians die? That would be like questioning the Holocaust for some people.
Right.
Now, most people don't even really know what the Holodomor was.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Well, you're not Ukrainian.
Right.
And if you ask one of your Ukrainian ex-wife, she would, she's probably heard of it. And actually, having had a Ukrainian ex-wife, you learned some stuff. I'm sure being married, I'll put it like this. If you grew up in the South and you literally, let's say, the area of the South you were in rural Georgia, and you never met a Jew, there are plenty of people who they've never met a Jew, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If people start talking about the Ashkenazis, you'd be way lost. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it's way down the spectrum. Todd's with us, so we're going to go to Todd. But there's a lot of these deep animosities with Ukraine that have been going on for a while. And you know what? We're going to, on the show High Dive that you and I do every week, we're going to talk about Ukraine and Russia stuff tomorrow, so we may get into some of this stuff with Jason Goodman tomorrow.
Great.
But joining us right now, right? That'd be fun.
Yeah.
From the Center for Immigration Studies, which is the only anti-illegal immigration think tank. I'll say that again. They're the only anti-illegal immigration think tank in a town full of pro-illegal immigration think tanks, a lot of which get a lot of funding from George Soros. And that's just true.
Yeah.
Joining us now from the Center for Immigration Studies is Todd. Pronounce your last name for me, because I'm afraid I'm going to screw it up.
Sure, it's Bensman, Todd Bensman.
Okay, Bensman. Forgive me, it's easy enough, but I was just afraid. I feel like I'm missing a syllable in there. Does that make sense?
Having me on.
No, we appreciate you coming on. And I want to talk about some of the work you've been doing. You're a writer, and you're involved in the video making process over there. Let's first off talk about the video you made where you went down to the border, and the fact that YouTube is kind of not full-on censoring it. They didn't ban it, but they're just hiding it, right, Todd?
I don't know about that. No, I'm unaware of what's happening with it today on YouTube. You tell me. I don't know, but I can tell you that I had a YouTube channel for a while. I just put clips of me being interviewed about immigration, short clips, nothing terrible, and they canceled me forever. Just took it all down after a couple of years.
Wow.
And if they're messing with me, I wouldn't be surprised.
Did they give you any explanation for the cancellation, or they just deleted it one day and said sorry?
It just said repeated and severe standard. I appealed, never heard anything back. So
yeah.
Well, and because you're telling the truth about immigration, which is a very divisive subject and heavily censored. And one of the things you talk about in this video is these QR code visas. Explain what a QR code visa is. Sounds very high tech, Todd.
Well, it's a new innovation that the Mexican government came up with recently to enable. Let me back up. It's a new kind of visa that the Mexican government put together, but the purpose of it was to release 50,000 migrants that they were holding back in their southernmost provinces on purpose, making them apply for these elaborate, long, lengthy, bureaucratic, loophole-ridden visas, asylum and residence cards for Mexico, which they need to travel. So they're doing this as a favor to the Biden administration, which wants fewer people to be showing up at the border and the numbers to go down for their political purposes. And the Mexicans were holding them back, but they started to riot. And they were causing traffic shutdowns and disrupting the city. And pretty soon the Tapachulans in that city, started to go vigilante, and, things just got to be a mess. So they had to clear them out. The way that they cleared them out was they provided everybody with this QR code visa and rounded up about 500 buses or so and put them on the buses to specific cities across Mexico, 14 different cities, so that you couldn't see them move. It's called an ant operation in cartel language and smuggling language, where you have a whole bunch of different ant trails all collectively moving the product, a certain amount of product in, but sight unseen. The government modified this as a way to break its deal with Biden and get rid of all these people to the U.S. border. And that's what they did in late December, early January. About 50,000 migrants got these QR codes. They were told to go to the designated cities. They did. And then the QR code visas started showing up on the Texas side of the Rio Grande because, they just use these things to just get over the border. So that did the United States no good at all, and certainly was not in the spirit of the deal that the Obrador administration had with the Biden government.
Well, so let me ask this too. Actually, let's play. Hey, Saul, we have that clip. I want to play a clip that actually I think relates to. You can tell me, Todd, if this relates to the story. Let's hit that, Saul. Let's hear that questioning.
Thanks, Jen. A question about immigration. Sure. Why is it that large numbers of single adult men are being released into the United States just hours after being apprehended at the southern border?
Well, I'm not sure the specifics of what you're referring to, Peter. What I can tell you in terms of what our policy is and how we're approaching the border is that we continue to be under Title 42. Migrants who cannot be expelled under Title 42 are placed into immigration proceedings. And one of those avenues could be placement in an alternative to detention program in the interior of the United States. Sometimes that means moving migrants to other parts of the United States to move to different detention facilities where they wait for next steps in the immigration process, such as a court hearing, and are required to check in with a local ICE office. So that is certainly something that is happening out there in the country and is consistent with our policy.
And you mentioned that they're supposed to check in at a local ICE office, but we know that just between March and August, which is a very small sample size, DHS says more than 47,000 of these migrants that were given notices to report did not show up. So why let them into the U.S. unsupervised in the first place?
Well, again, we have a stringent protocols and processes that we implement here. That includes expelling individuals who come in under Title 42, given we are still in a global pandemic, and includes those who do not show up will be subject to the repercussions of that. So that is the policy we're implementing from our Homeland Security Department.
Now, Todd, does this relate to the? First off, I never heard the term ant operation because I don't hang out with the cartels as much as I used to. But that makes sense. Does this relate to the kind of thing you were talking about?
Not really. This is something that's happening in Mexico, where, I mean, the people that we're seeing crossing probably all had QR codes. That's how they got in. That's how they got this far. But what she's referring to there is called parole, and they're paroling in they've done this with hundreds of thousands. The latest estimate that I've seen is about 700,000 allowed into the United States to self-report to the Superior Immigration Office. It's kind of an honor system. That's why.
And do we know why they're adult males? Because he asked that at the beginning of the question. I thought that was interesting. Do we know what's up with that?
It's unusual because adult males are typically thrown back into Mexico immediately, expelled immediately into Mexico under Title 42. It's the women and children and family units that are paroled in like that by the hundreds of thousands. That's what caused this mass migration crisis, is that they started allowing these hundreds of thousands of family units in, and you know, they all have social media and cell phones, so they're taking selfies of themselves in Indiana and Seattle and whatever and saying the door's open. So
wow,
entices hundreds of thousands of more to come through. But what's weird about this is that usually the men, the adult men and women without children, are pushed right back to Mexico, where they try again and again and again. There's nothing to keep them from trying as many times as they've got energy and time for until they finally make it. There's about 50,000 a month, 30 to 50,000 a month this whole year that are classified as gotaways, in addition to the 200,000 average a month that we've been seeing of the people that we've laid hands on, you know, apprehensions. So I don't really know what the story is with the adult males. That was a good question. I saw the video. It was good video. It raises this question is like, since when are we now paroling in all these single adult men? So I don't have an answer for that, but neither did she.
You know, Todd, I think a lot of people... Sorry, Lee. I think a lot of people jump to conclusions about why these things are happening. But I'm curious, do you have any insight? I mean, we see in New York City, the governor has said American citizens, people who were born here, lived here all their lives, paid taxes, built this place. I'm not allowed to go into a restaurant. I'm not allowed to go into a public place with a mask on until this morning. And yet, people who aren't citizens of this country, their putative rights are being guarded and protected by the Biden administration as if it's the most sacred thing. Do you have any insight that maybe the normal average person hasn't arrived at as to why this would be happening, this incongruence?
Well, the short answer is no. I get asked this all the time, and you know, why are they letting this happen? Nobody has ever let anything like this happen in the United States. No Democrat. Clinton didn't do it. Obama didn't do it. Nobody does this, where you just allow 700,000 people who cross the border to have the rewards of, you know, citizenship and work authorization. And, you know, we're never going to find them again. We're never going to deport any of these people. And, you know, why do we do that? You know, my best guess is it's kind of part of this liberal progressive theology or ideology that, you know, fancies itself virtuous.
No, Todd Bensman, I think that's a great explanation, a short one. We're out of time, unfortunately. Love to have you on again real soon. Todd Bensman, everybody, from the Center for Immigration Studies. Thanks to Jason. Thanks to Ian Schilling. We'll be back tomorrow on The Backstory.